Hello whisky fans, so today we have Cardhu Gold Reserve. So this, at least where I'm from, is widely available in most of the major supermarkets and it's a very affordable single malt. It's definitely worth pointing out that this is not the same as the Cardhu 12-year-old. If we wanted to be cynical, we could say that this looks a lot like an attempt by Cardhu to sell some whisky to people that are a fan of the 12-year-old with a slightly cheaper production, because it is a similar whisky to the 12-year-old, both in terms of the whisky that's inside the bottle and the presentation, but without the age statement. But it must be said that, at least in the UK, this is a very affordable single malt. I picked this one up for about £25, so the question really is it a bargain or is it just cheap? It feels very appropriate to be reviewing this one after I've finished reviewing the Johnnie Walker range of whiskies, not only because Cardhu was the first distillery purchased by the Johnnie Walker company, but it's actually very noticeable in a lot of their especially lower end coloured bottlings. And I also think that this Cardhu single malt has something in common with the Johnnie Walker Blue label, but we'll get to that later. Let's get on with the nosing and the tasting. So on the nose, the first thing that I'm really noticing is there's lots of rich caramel notes in there, and that's fine, it's a style and it's reasonably pleasant. Also getting lots of sweet green apples, there really is a strong green apple note to the nose of this whisky. It's a very sweet whisky, also quite nutty, definitely some hazelnut in there, and it's a very floral whisky as well. And it's floral in a way that I imagine would have quite a lot of appeal to a mass market. It's not a challenging whisky, it's very sweet, reasonably simple, floral, very pleasant. I'm also getting some spicy oak in there, perhaps some overactive casks maybe. It's coming over a little bit modern, in the sense that it seems a bit like it's been pushed to maturity a little bit quickly perhaps. Definitely some gingery raw oak in there. I'm also getting some fatty notes, some notes of cooking oil and fatty greasy notes, which in small quantities doesn't ruin a whisky. As long as it doesn't overpower and spoil the experience, it adds a little bit of character. But what is not particularly pleasant is that wood spice does tend to come back again and again. It's a raw, oaky, spicy, gingery note, which I'm not a huge fan of. Also has to be said that there's lots of fudgy notes. You could almost say that it's overly rounded. And again on the palate I'm getting some dry, bitter, oaky notes, which I have to say is a little bit ugly. It's not quite as nice as the nose was. Also getting some graininess, which I think is something that carries through into some of the cheaper Johnnie Walker blended products. But there is also some fruity apple notes on the palate, which not as much as on the nose, but that definitely comes through on the palate as well. And I think the combination of the two actually works quite well, because you've got that caramel quality and the rich sweet apple note actually combines quite well. Almost reminds you of toffee apples. It's always nice when you get these little Magdalena moments out of a whisky. I think late on the palate you are getting some maltiness come through, but it's not huge. And it has to be said that the experience on the palate is a little bit weak. And the finish, I would say bitter, slightly fruity, and fairly short. As for a grade, I'm going to give this one a C-. I think the Cardhu Gold Reserve, you've got a very nice nose. It's got some lovely aromas in it if you take the time to pick them out. But the palate is much weaker, and that's really what it has in common with the Blue label. They've created a nice whisky, but I think especially the fact that they've watered this down to 40% has meant that you're left with a lovely nose and a very underpowered palate that doesn't follow it up. So one thing that a lot of people will want to know, how does this compare to the Cardhu 12-year-old? I'd actually say that it's not that much different. You can tell that this is a younger whiskey, and it feels a little bit forced, especially in those raw, spicy oaky notes. But the difference in quality is not huge, and I would actually say if you've got a choice between buying the Cardhu 12-year-old or saving a bit of money with the Cardhu Gold Reserve, especially if this one is on offer, which quite often happens, I would probably say give the Cardhu Gold Reserve a try. And also, if you're a fan of the cheaper Johnnie Walker blends, definitely the red label, and perhaps the black label as well, I would say it's probably also worth a try for you. But for anyone else, I would say this is probably a fairly good whiskey for a beginner who's looking for something that's got a little bit more character and more flavours to pick out than your blends. But apart from that, I can't really recommend it that highly. It's a nice one to receive as a gift perhaps, but that's probably about it.